representation gets thinner and thinner. Yeah, it's a problem. 23 years later of employment equity, this is what we are seeing. And I guess that's why this agitation now to say maybe we are looking at the problem incorrectly. And maybe at some point we need to start looking at the problem differently for us to be able to get to the results that we want to see. We have been an accommodating people. I mean, even the policies that we are referring to, largely they are saying that employers must decide what skills they need and the demographics based on the regions that they are based. You know, there's a lot that we leave to the discretion of the very people that we need them to transform. So maybe those kind of things need to start changing. We need to start being more aggressive in taking back control of the economy that we believe is ours. And we cannot do that until we have the skills that are required. And as Black Management Forum, that's our forte. We focus on the managerial skills that when the leaders of corporate SA were saying that we don't have the managers to put in these positions, we said, well, we'll develop them. And then you will have no excuse. And I think as a country, we've done very well at developing the managerial skills. So right now, there's absolutely no excuse why we keep seeing the picture looking the way it looks. The recent excuse that now we are seeing is that, of course, we will not fire people for transformation, which is true. That's what we said. We don't expect people to be dismissed. It will be against our employment, our labor laws. So we don't want people to be dismissed to make way for transformation. So what now? We find ourselves stuck. But while we are still stuck, the world is moving forward. 4IR has now become the thing. Technology, without technology, there's nothing that can be done. It's the future, it's who we're going to be, and for a very long time. And the question is, are we gearing ourselves up for that reality, for that future? Then you look at studies, global studies that talk to the skills of the future, which is one of the things we are discussing in this panel today. One of the reports from the IMF tells that in the next 2 years, in 20, you know, when they do these studies, they always predicted that 50% of the workforce will need to be reskilled for technological advancement. So it is our reality. We are now 2 years away from 2030, which means that we need to be assessing, are we having the skills that are required for that reality and the future that we are going towards. But also, when they predict some of the skills of the future that are required, I find comfort in realizing that the skills are not too different from the skills that we've been building. The question, I guess, is, have we been developing the skills that we needed to be developed? Like when they summarize them, top 4 skills that would be required of the future. Number 1 is problem solving. I think we've always been solving problems. It's not a new skill. It's a skill of the future, but it's a skill that we've always needed to have. You know, you need to be able to problem solve. Maybe because the future is so unpredictable now, and our world has become so unpredictable, the skill is more enhanced, that you need to be in a position to be solving problems, new problems, that you are constantly be dealing with. And our world changes now quicker than it used to because of technology. Self-management skills are second on the list of the skills of the future. You know, ability to manage change, resilience, you know, managing yourself. Those are the kind of skills that are required for the future. Technology, funny enough, is last. It's not the main skill that you need to be having in order for you to be performing at your optimal level in the future. Technology use and development, it's another skill that you need, but it's not the critical ones. So the critical skills are still the skills that you would need to have as a human. Working with people, a critical skill. And that's why sometimes I'm listening to some of the conversations that were happening earlier about maths and science being the key skills that we need. And I was like, really? To work with people, you don't really need maths and science. You need other skills. So we must always be striving for balance, should not be underestimated. And the guys who are creative that we would have been having, it's been shown throughout history that the best innovators, they borrow from the arts. So we must never underestimate those kind of skills as well. So while we're pushing our children that they must focus on maths and science, we must also accept that not all of our children are that way inclined, and all of them have a place when we build a country. We are building a country, and therefore the skills must be all balanced, and we must borrow from each other. We can't just focus on one. We borrow from each other. So that's comforting. The shift towards the division of labor is becoming a dividing. What does this mean for us? A space. So what does that mean for us when we are moving towards a world that will require technology to be a big part of it? So to help from a policy perspective, but Minister will come in later. So we have our panelists who will help us unpack these to the Presidency's Advisory Council on National Orders, and currently serves in the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator as a board member and chairs its Citizen Forum. Thank you so much, Dr. Professor Pakeng. Welcome on stage. And our next panelist is Lindy Wentlapo, who is a chartered accountant, currently the Chief Financial Officer of the Wholesale and Retail Sector Education and Training Authority. She is an accomplished professional with over 18 years of experience providing fiscal, strategic, and operational leadership in multiple sectors. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. And then our last panelist who's going to be joining us is Mapefo Eno. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. I kept trying. Mfepong. She has more than 30 years in public service across different departments, including National Department of Education, Department of Transport, Northwest Department of Transport, Road and Community Services Safety. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome our panelists as we discuss this topic of skills development. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. Maybe just as an opening, I would just to give you an opportunity to reflect on this topic. You know, when you were asked to come in here and talk about this, what was your reflection on it? I'll start from the corner.
Thank you so much. Let me start with the correct pronunciation. It's Ano Frimpong. It's
Okay.
a double barrel surname.
Okay.
Since we're talking education and skills,
Yes, you must all be educated.
if you couldn't pronounce something, the teachers taught us how to break it into small pieces until you get it right. Not only for you, but for everyone in the room. When I got the invitation, I reflected on the fact that generally there is a fear attached to what technological advancements do with regards to the skill sets that are currently in a company, in a sector, and in the country at large. But that fear is not necessarily informed by fact. It's just a fear of change. I find that, like you have said, that 4IR and skills of the future are not necessarily that require, in an environment where there's a number of issues to think of, a number of competing priorities to think of, and a number of factors to think of. If, for an example, you are in a leadership position and you've got to deal with a crisis with incomplete information. And I find that problem solving, like you said, is something that everyone can do. But the question is, if you problem solve quicker with incomplete information, what does that say if the decision you have made is a decision that is now questioned or has resulted in a negative outcome? So I find that the problem is not with the skills, but is with the rate and the speed at which we adapt. Is the rate and speed at which we don't get caught up in analytical thinking without making a decision, because sometimes a decision is required now, but with incomplete data at your disposal, maybe making a decision by being resilient and knowing that maybe I'll learn a lesson out of it if it doesn't go north and it goes south. So when I reflected on the top 10 skills of the future, in fact, they said for 2025, I realized that those skills generally are called soft skills. Things that are generally regarded to be the responsibility of HR or capital development. And because skills development is not necessarily regarded as the bedrock by all for anything to thrive, it then gets equated with something that should just be dealt with by HR professionals and people that are involved in skills development. But it encourages me that the country and the leaders and the different occupational classes that we have the capacity to take decisions, take tough decisions. But what I find as a female, when I have to take decisions, and as a black female, I find that I can't take a decision as a male. I take a decision as a woman. And I deploy my internal capacity as a female to possibly collaborate and ask more questions and take a decision. But I find that, unfortunately, a female has to prove themselves more than 100 times. That one, they are in the right position. Two, they have the capacity to lead. Three, they have a voice that can be listened to. And those things, unfortunately, become sort of like an impediment for decision-making, self-mastery, resilience, analytical thinking, and those things. So I find that if I'm a female, and having been a female in a male-dominated sector for close to 15 years now, I have found that, unfortunately, self-mastery becomes my top skill. How I get myself grounded, how I get equilibrium, and how I draw on my strength from within is that which keeps me sane. But for males, I don't think they struggle like we do. If I am a tough leader, that, well, she is problematic. She's got issues. She needs to be managed. And I find that to be an impediment. But resilience gets drawn from tough experiences. And therefore, if I look at the topic, I believe both males and females in different classes of occupations, be it semi-skilled workers, be it skilled workers, be it professionals and artisans, managers, leaders, that we do have the capacity to do those skills, but it starts with us. And it starts with us being confident that even if my decision is criticized and cut to pieces, I took the right decisions for that time, for that moment. And therefore, I put, as much as I looked at the top 10 skills, I put resilience and self-mastery at the top of the list. Because it's if I don't get it right, and I doubt myself, and I don't give confidence that I know what I'm doing, then because leadership is about influence, the people that you are working with or the people that are depending on you to make decisions might question that, is she able to make the decision, or is this the right decision? Then you've got to influence them to make the right decisions. Let me give you a typical example. If you look at skills development, Currently, we've got different programs. We've got programs for artisans, we've got programs for learnerships, we've got cadets that are for engineering, as well as leadership development programs. I have had to look at the modules that we have, or unit standards, to say in the transport sector, what ways can we get these 4 cross-cutting skills being part of the programs of development or learning programs, so that as much as you're doing the technical part, you also have to do what we used to call soft part, which is now actually the surviving part and the part that will allow us to.
Opportunity to the rest to reflect on the topic.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's actually a very interesting topic, and I think when I got invited and I looked at the topic, I think the first thing I thought of is technology as a disruptor. Are we ready? Are we ready, and do we have enough response plans in place? As a society, as a country, all relevant role players involved to understand what the advancements mean, the tech advancement, and also to understand how it's going to impact particularly our labor force. I think as a CETA, that is basically our most important beneficiaries, the labor force. And how do we support the sector in a manner and in a way that is responsive to those rapid changes? I think one of the panelists earlier on, I think it was Sariti, made an important statement, and I thought it actually cuts across and also impacts this particular topic, when he said that when they started out, they were a coal business, and then over time they've transformed and they've become an energy business in order to be responsive to the changes and the new requirements for other energy sources. And it's the same thing in terms of the impact of the 4th industrial revolution and all other technology advances. And obviously I'm going to take a biased view and focus mainly, maybe my examples are going to be related to the retail space, simply because I am a representative of the wholesale and retail sector. For instance, in our space, the rapid advancement, in fact, it has overtaken us. If you think of e-commerce, for instance, have we thought about, and do we have enough mechanisms in place to upskill the current unskilled labor force so that they adapt to the changes? And obviously, what you call it, COVID lockdown. And also, the question then is, how do we as the CETAs and other relevant parties make sure that we bridge that gap, upskilling your current sector and to respond to the advancements? I mean, the e-commerce space, as much as it has advanced, it's still 4% of the entire retail, which actually means there's potential for growth. And you can see it. I mean, there's current developments that are happening that do indicate that there's potential for growth. One topical one being the global e-commerce giant coming into the market, Amazon, investing over 30 billion rands into South Africa. Another common topical issue is Massmart, also rapidly advancing their e-commerce arm. So the question is our skills, our current skill, a labor force, sufficiently skilled to adapt to those changes? And also coming back to Mapefu's point that yes, I do think we need to look at it as opportunity as opposed to the potential for job losses. But the question is, are we sufficiently capacitated? Are we ready? Are we armed? Yeah. Are we forearmed? Other, I think, developments that we should think about and their impact, and I think this is also just another very key and topical thing around the space, is data analysts. So it's a key skill that's coming up. We talk about artificial intelligence a lot, but we don't understand that in order for artificial intelligence to happen, data is important that you don't own. As Africans, we generally don't own our data. We generally also don't have the tech infrastructure that allows us and support us to analyze that data. So what ends up happening is then the global players take our own data, interpreting it for us, then sell us back the intelligence. So In as much as we can sit and have lengthy discussions around artificial intelligence, advancements, and 4IR and throw those terms around, I do think we need to take the topic to more practical response. What is our response plan in ensuring that our labor force is sufficiently capacitated and ready to respond to those advancements and those changes? And because I mean, that is where transformation comes from. If the labor force isn't productive, then transformation is really just a concept. Opening remarks, thank you.
Thank you so much. Prof?
Thank you very much, first, for inviting me. Very delighted to share this. And I mean, the title of this discussion, for me, what it did, it sort of reminded me of the pace of technological innovation and science growth in science. Science and technology are growing at an unprecedented pace. And that's at universities. As we sit in like this, laboratory cells, and of course, being in the Geneva Science and Anticipation Diplomacy Anticipator, Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, what we're dealing with is what are the governance or policies that we need, whether the growth is going to increase inequality or is going to enable us to actually close the inequality gap. Because that's inevitable. And it's not just problem solving, whatever, it's like when you dig deep, then you get into things like human augmentation, right? There's developments that come as a result of wanting to solve a problem, maybe a problem of cancer, right? But that can lead to that same technology being used to do something else for someone who doesn't have cancer. I mean, you may not think about it, but we can design babies these days, right? It really doesn't matter, okay? But you've got to think about this, and some people elsewhere in the world are thinking about it. And of course, Geneva, being what it is, a center of multilateralism, that's why they started this, to say, can we develop these governance processes and policies for the world? And that's the work that we're doing there. And so for me, it said, okay, it's important to have this discussion. We're having this discussion in terms of once they are here, what do we do? The other discussion you can have, you can say, it's growing. What does it mean for governing this, whatever is coming out? Of course, the other question is a labor market. You're thinking about the people who are there. Are universities producing what we need? Right, now, let me draw on this. For me, in my previous job as Vice Chancellor, one of the things when I got to UCT in 2016, in July, I remember sitting in a room, and it was towards the end of the year, and there was a conversation. My colleagues at UCT who are in management would laugh about this because I tell this story over and over again. And at this time, 2016, the discussion as we prepare for the exam was, okay, how are we going to, phones are not allowed, and then watches are not allowed, so we've got to have clock watches on the walls because students can copy using watches. And then I said to them, oh, you are solving the wrong problem. That's the wrong problem. The problem is not the fact that students have a watch. The problem is, what do we teach? Why do we teach it? How do we assess it? Why do we assess it like that? What are we producing the students for? Right? Now, just remember, it was just the end of 2016, right? And I said to them, in a matter of no time, students will wear glasses and press, and they'll be able to get whatever they can get online, right? And they said, oh, now, and they said, well, it will be buttons, and then are we going to keep stripping them, right? But this is not new. Technology keeps growing. We do something. I'm a maths teacher, as you know, and I've taught maths at high school, university. When graphing calculators came, we had a big challenge. You cannot no longer ask students a question of drawing a graph, because they can press a button, the graph pops up. So what you need to ask yourself is, why do you want them to know the graph? And now from there you design the question. Now you say problem solving is a skill. It's a skill that we know. But what does it take to solve the problem? It is not trivial. Let me tell you today, in solving a problem, from where I'm sitting, working with university academics, I would say to them, no problem can be solved with people only from one discipline. So the idea that you don't need maths anymore is a little bit dodgy. I would say to you, you actually need mathematics and you actually need the arts, and that's why many universities are transforming right now, and they should, if they are not, to allow students in the Faculty of Humanities to take computer science, major in computer science and sociology or psychology, or take mathematics up to third year, and they do that. You know, and one of the problems that we had at the beginning of 2019 was a mathematics class maths one class that was overcrowded. Students went to Twitter saying, I'm charging them a lot and they have nowhere to sit. And I said to my colleagues, nice problem. This is the kind of problem I want to have, of a maths one class that's overcrowded. Why? Because we're having BSOC-size students and BA students taking maths as much as they do in that. You cannot close out any discipline because we need multidisciplinarity, and interdisciplinarity is the key to problem solving. If you do not have that, you're going to have a problem. Very surprised. And so it's the skills that the students, graduates come up with become important. Let me go to labor. Because many of us, of course, some of us have got businesses, some of us run businesses, right? So as COVID started, I said to my colleagues, okay, COVID is starting, there'll be the lockdown, there'll be no one on campus. This is the opportune time to test drive grass cutting machines, robots. Because there's no union that's going to fight with us that we are piloting this and they're going to lose jobs. So you try them, whatever, when COVID ends, and then someone in HR must think, how do we reskill people who are cutting grass, and what do we do? And then, of course, I met with labor, as I did every month, members of union. I brought them, and I said, the world is changing. Guys, it's changing. With the world changing, and technology growing, and science growing, your area of practice is not staying stagnant. But actually, you can change it. And I said to them, the question about who owns labor will become important. Who owns labor when we have intelligent machines that can do many things? Who owns it? And I said to them, can you work smarter so that you own the labor? Rather than fighting the presence of the robots, can you be the guys who now own them, and then they rent them out to universities and start a process? So we've always have to be ahead of. Academics are caught napping because of ChatGPT, because students can just press and stuff come out. Of course, ChatGPT is a little dodgy because it ends in 2021, and there's studies that shows already that there's a student who referred to a wrong case because ChatGPT gave them. But these things are not supposed to be a disruption for us. We should have disruptors in our room, people like me who ask the wrong questions, the questions you don't want to hear, okay? That says, well, your area of practice is changing. What are you doing to make sure that you continue to be important, to be needed, whether you're a company, whether you're an individual, whether you're a union?
Yeah, thank you so much. And hence then the skill to adapt is so critical. Everything is changing. The world is no longer the same as we've known it. But now from a policy perspective and as a country, this can be all overwhelming. Each industry and each sector new developments are happening. It can all be overwhelming. How do we manage all of this from a policy perspective? Because I also enjoyed what kept on coming up, even in the other discussions around the kind of country that we want to build. That what is our philosophy? Yesterday someone even put it as, what is the one thing that all of us as South Africans can say we would die for? Because we all buy into it and we've agreed that that's the kind of country that we are building. And therefore, these are the kind of skills that we expect from an individual who is moving in this direction. How do we manage all of this from a policy perspective?
I think we should relook at Skills Development Act and reflect on the current realities and future needs. Because I'm not sure if it's still relevant as it is. I think we must review the mandate of CETAs. I mean, CETAs have mandates, but I'm not sure if we look at CETAs, we'll find them that actually, maybe there's a way, because I don't work in CETAs, and I would like our colleagues, do we need a CETA that focuses on this area? Or do we need CETAs, each one of them to be focusing on AI and so on? Because it's a matter of time before we have machines that are more intelligent than human beings. The idea that it's the human being who programs a machine is so outdated. It doesn't work that way with AI, guys. You feed in the information, you train it to do more things than you can, and it can do it. So I really think we've got to challenge the CETAs. I'm not sure that we're ready in that side.
Can she come in? Because she knows the mandate.
Yeah, well, I'm being provocative enough.
I think maybe we need to address the issue of the mandate of the CETA first. I think generally there's a lot of misconception in terms of what CETAs do. There's lots of discussions where there's belief that CETAs undertake or conduct the training themselves, of which we don't. We are not training institutions or facilities. And there's also just misconceptions that CETAs are just levy collectors, and that we just disperse funds as and when we please. And also just generally what we find is that there's a lot of resistance, or rather I would say malicious compliance from industry in response to skills development and obviously engagements with CETAs. But if I summarize it in short and maybe in layman's terms, what a CETA's mandate is, and I like to use the word partnership. I think a lot of people use the word facilitate training, and I don't quite like it. I think it's a bit vague, and it doesn't really talk to what it is that we are meant to do. I'd like to call us partners of industry and development. And what do I mean by that? We basically are mandated to fully understand, hence we have a research element also in our mandate. We are basically mandated to understand the sector fully, and by understanding it fully, understanding what its labor force needs are. And in doing so, thereby ensuring that those labor force needs are met, and that the labor force is sufficiently capacitated in response to those needs. Over and above that, we also are mandated to consider your future labor force, so to speak. So it's your pre-entrance. So how do we do that? We actually then provide funding for initiatives such as work placements, your internships, which then actually then facilitates that introduction of new labor into the business. But essentially, it's a multi-pronged mandate because if you have an effective and sufficiently skilled labor force, essentially that should support your business growth and ultimately feed into economic transformation of the business. And one of the things that as a CETA, I believe we do well, and I can only speak tell space, the informal sector. We have very interesting programs where we're looking at informal sectors and also your small enterprises, where we really just upskill them, help them digitize their businesses, and really move them up a notch. From being the lady who sells amaskopasi or vegetables at the corner to really being a business owner who now owns a container, and you've actually got certain processes and business processes in place. And that essentially is the role of a CETA. So suddenly you are changing a household. You're changing one individual's business, but actually you're also changing the economic status of that particular household. So that is essentially how, and our role, if done effectively, impacts on economic transformation on a greater scale. So that's just in layman's terms what
So
the
there's
mandate
a lot that
is.
is currently happening that has impact, but we don't talk about it as much as we could be talking about it. There was a question earlier around how do we then connect? Because the SETAs address the labor space. How do we then connect it to the schools? You know, making sure that from a young age, our young people are geared towards a specific direction. How do we do that?
I'll share an example and just add one thing based on what my colleague has said. You cannot grow the economy inclusively without skills, without people and entrepreneurs and workers, prospective workers that are skilled and ready to plug and play in that sector. Now, that is why in the country, Skills Development Act was meant to close the gap of employment equity, where employers were saying we don't have sufficiently capacitated leaders, managers, professionals, engineers, and artisans of other race groups. So skills development is a support to employment equity, and on the other side, a support to Triple BEE Act, because in order for this business to get the skills, let's suppose they are in transport, the transport sector would need to have developed the skills for a prospective business owner, prospective worker in different occupations. So our job is to really bring about the skills, but not in isolation, with universities, with TVET colleges, with private training academies of each company, and also with global partners and regional partners. Now, you asked a question about the policies. What do we start with? I believe we need to answer the question as follows. What are the low-hanging fruits that we have with the current skill sets that we have that we can start to deploy so that we as South Africa are not left behind, because we are part of the global market? And if we were to look at the skill sets that are required in the 21 sectors of the economy, what are those skill sets? How long would it take for those skill sets to be deployed? And if they were to be deployed, is the supply in the country? Is the supply outside? If the supply is outside, how do we connect to that? I believe there's sufficient policy frameworks on governance from the government side, concrete things that we can do while things are moving at a fast pace. What are those? Now, in all the SETAs, we all have 4IR adaptation and technologies in the programs that we have. In the transport sector, what we did, we looked at the top 10 skills and we looked at the current programs. How agile and how adaptable are they for the skills to be developed? And coming to the schools, in the traditional way of exposing a young child to the different careers that the country needs, including even future careers that possibly are not yet present in the country, people to tell them what subject choices they need to do. We realized in TETA that if we do that traditional model, it won't help us. The reason being, there are no fee-paying schools that are in rural schools spread across the length and breadth of the country. That when you're talking about digitization, they don't even have data or internet and things like that. So we then took a deliberate thing to assist young children in schools. We adopted 60 schools, and we chose the schools that are the poorest among the poorest. And our approach was to say we will assist the teachers, especially with enrichment classes where they lack the knowledge, and get experts to assist them. On the other part, a school cannot just be about teachers, it's about learners as well. We would then assist the learners with learner camps, revisions, motivating them, helping them to really have self-mastery at that age. On the third aspect, we then said with the leadership, with the principals, what can we do to assist the principals to lead the schools together with the school governing body, so that a leadership development program that we are putting in place for the school principals. We've been doing this from 2012. Why are we doing this? We do adopt a secondary school so that from grade 8, grade 9, by the time they have to make subject choices in grade 10, they already are exposed not only to the transport sector skills, but to the skills that they are aligned to, that they might be interested in, and the occupations that they may be interested in. You can't do a school adoption without giving them scholarships when they complete. You can't assist a school in a rural area without giving them teacher support in the form of interns that go into the schools and support the principals, because poor, let me not use the word poor, rural schools have what we call multi-grade teaching. A principal teaches their classes from grade 8 up until grade 12, alone in some instances, which then means they now have to do administration, but they have to get into class, they have to find a way to get these learners with different talents, with different grades, to actually succeed simply because of capacity in resources. So we saw it as a CSI initiative to support the learners in schools so that by the time they come to a CETA, they want to do a program in a CETA, they at least have made the right choices and subjects. They have been exposed to different careers and industries, and they can then get a better chance. Now, we are just but one CETA, and I believe if all of us were to change our CSI and not just paint walls, but do tangible things that are skills linked, it could go a long way to give a child in a rural area a chance.
Thank you so much for that. It's always good to see the practical things that are being done, that it's not always just dark. I don't know if there's anybody who has a question, just two, because we don't have time anymore. Just two people who have something to say or ask. We don't have time.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Voka Voka from the rural area at Limpopo. Yes, I'm a street vendor, and I'm happy to represent the other street vendors. Even if I'm not so much comfortable, I will get to that. But I told myself that if I can get that platform to express my experience and the stuff like that. Originally, I'm a child of the ancestors. I'm a traditional health practitioner. That's why they say I'm Dr. Voka Voka. So where I am operating, I have actually done something that most of the people can wonder about. At R101 stand to 1 Pinas refer, I have got 5 years that I have placed myself on the street corner and try and Abu Mkuluba Baba understand that is whatsoever. So what I have experienced, starting from the street where I was, things has changed. Because one day when I went to the bank, they said, okay, we need a 6 months bank statement. And the complicated papers to fill for the person who is passing by on the street, who's selling on the street. That is our problem. When it comes to a matter pertaining to the credit score utilization, the 70% or the 50% that one needs, to fill, if you are given the credit score, they will check what is your utilization, because there is something that the credit score says it's a thin file. When I go to the bank and say I'm asking for money, they say, okay, Dr. Voka Voka, go and open an account at Vodacom. When I'm unable to pay it, they take me to the attorneys. And the attorneys default me. Now I cannot pay. I go to CETA, they say 6 months bank statement. Then I've been going throughout. I don't know how to do the business whatsoever. If I tell the other one, they say, okay, Dr. Voka, this and that. So I am representing all for those who are selling on the street. Now I can see that I'm a professional. I'm a professional now. That is where the money of South Africa is.
Yes.
That's where we are making money. And education is needed, for those people to go and say, look what I have done 2 years ago. Every time I get the money, I run to the bank, I deposit the money. Bank charges, bank fees. Bank charges, bank fees. 1,800 for the street vendor. You
No,
take
thank
all
you so
my
much.
Voga money.
Thank you
man.
so much, Dr.
Oh,
Voga.
woman. I've fallen.
I
Come
think-
on.
I think
And I'm not going to go here. Before someone of the big company says, Dr. Voga, here we are, we want to make an example for you so that next year when I come here, the street vendors should be recognized. I'll go to the parliament with the police having the bodyguards.
No, thank you so much. And those are the real stories that will grow the economy. You know, we must grow from where we are. So last question, and then we're closing the session. Oh, there's a lady here. Okay. Okay, you can go ahead.
Thank you so much. My name is Tepo Mojapelo. I'm an attorney at Mojapelo Attorneys.
Afterwards, yeah.
Mine is to say the sentiments that have been shared here, they speak to, in legal terms, the legal pluralism that exists between the traditional councils and also the government as we have it now. Ne? And because of that, there is a almost top-down structure coming from the government as it is now, or rather the, how do I call it? I don't know how to call this, but there seems to be that top-down approach on the indigenous laws that we have. Why I'm making this, and it's going to be a question that I'm posing, but these seem to be the sentiments coming in from the council. Now, what I would like to see is a position where there is a marrying of the two that allows for all of these skills and developments to come through. How that comes through is that in 2016, Rand Water had a tender where the tender requirements were that a big company adopts a smaller company for purposes of work generally in any tendering process. And I'm speaking specifically from a business point of view. What we would like to see is exactly that skills development from a high level to bringing it down to where the development needs to happen is with us. So I am a small law firm, but I still need assistance in developing the skills to get to that high law firm. But we need that skills development to come through from the seaters, you know, from even those tender processes. And that's what I'm saying. Going back again to that marrying of the traditional and also this government, if we see more of that happening in terms of structures that are put in, then we are going to be able to reach them direct collaboration with the government and with the traditional councils.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think this is a very important topic because it now brings everything that we're talking about when we talk about transformation. We cannot transform until we have the skills that are needed. We think people should be going. So we can't leave people behind because we're all thinking about technology, and then technology is the only thing that must be, we're focusing on. Thank you so much. In the interest of time, unfortunately, we can no longer continue any further. I had recognized you, but we can no longer have
One
you
more.
as, we can't, unfortunately. There's another function happening straight after this. Thank you so much. And oh, a picture.
Vuka. I go to Limpopo. Utswa Limpopo kere. Ke tlo wa araba kere. Utswa gae kere. Ya, re tlo lokisetsa. I think what panic as well. I think it's panicking now.
Yeah, it's panicking
It's fine. Thank you so much to our moderator, Dr. Sibongile, panelists, for that animated conversations. You could feel the energy So thank you so much. That was we took a bit long. Time is not on our side. I would like to call upon the moderator for the next session, Dr. Tseho. Please come on stage and introduce your panel. Thank you so much.
Afternoon, President of the BBC and the CE Khanki and his team. Thank you for putting together this Sterling Summit. And greetings to all our guests and sponsors. And to rephrase the topic, what is our understanding of the role of judiciary in society? May I call on our esteemed and Mr. Wayne Duvenage, the CEO of Alta. This session is meant to answer if indeed the three arms of government legislating that legislative framework and the implementation thereof is necessary for redress and to achieve social justice. Just noting the outcomes of some of the rulings we have seen come out of our courts on issues of transformation. The most recent case in our memory is where the former Minister of Tourism, Mamoloko Kubai, had to appeal all the way to the Constitutional Court for including broad-based economic empowerment as a criteria in the Tourism Relief Fund for SMMEs. This, please, must not be interpreted as an attack on the judiciary by the BBC. Media, please. Our demographic background, Black Africans, 80.9, whites, 7.8. Agricultural land employment equity, 2021. Whites still occupy 63.2% of top management, with the likelihood that they still protect the access to the value chains in the entities they lead. Black Africans, directly listed investments in the JSE, hovers around 3%. It is clear that unless we are deliberate in our actions and ensure that all arms of government are aligned, social justice becomes a farce. Acknowledgement is given to the fact that it is democratically granted for political arms of government to provide a framework for progressive realization of socio-economic rights. However, within the context of constitutional democracy, the courts are equally mandated to contribute to the achievement of the envisaged social change. We do not advocate for the courts to become crusaders, but as arbiters to consider what contribution the judicial enforcement of socio-economic rights could make as a complementary strategy to achievement of social change. Will answer this question: is South Africa governed through the courts? And clarify what their understanding of social justice and redress and the role of courts is in this context. The question, in my view, becomes even more piercing if we concede that in spite of this, I think the first will be Mr. Duvenage. I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Good day. Thanks very much to the Council for the invitation, for my colleagues here. It is a very interesting topic, obviously, and it is a thought-provoking one, but it does give us one that ensures that we look at it and the legislature. And this delicate balance between those powers is very important, because you cannot allow one to usurp the other or extend their powers over the other. So the question is South Africa, is the country being governed through the courts? I think it's very important that we ensure or understand principles. Those separation of powers need to be in place, and no single branch should overpower the other one of those three. But it does require that each one holds the other accountable, and accountable for what? It is to ensure that our democracy is protected and the human rights and the rights of citizens are not usurped. And it's around that issue of accountability and service delivery and the protection of rights that is very important from the legislature. The utopia, of course, is when the courts aren't called on to rule. Imagine the executive runs the country in the best manner possible for the best outcomes of civil society, of the man in the street, and the legislature keeps them in check when they get their service delivery wrong, or when they try to usurp the powers and ignore the Constitution and pull them back in line, or where their service delivery by the executive is not up to speed. That's what we expect the legislature to do as well. But when the judiciary is called into play, it is not about the courts that go around trying to seek the injustices that government or the executive who goes and institutes cases. They can't do that. It is the people of the country that have to use the courts in order to protect themselves from the abuse of power. And we see that so often. And sadly, there is this view that when the courts rule against the executive, it's a case of, well, isn't the judiciary overreaching? And aren't they abusing their powers? But quite the contrary. Our view is more often than not, in fact, almost all the time, it is the public that has to, or civil society, that has to defer to the courts or rely on the courts to protect them from the abuse of this power. And we've seen it in many, many cases. So, you know, if you just look and go back to the Treatment Action Campaign, it's so sad to see how civil society had to use the courts to compel government to ensure that mother to child, the transmission of HIV, AIDS wasn't going to take place, and that the treatment had to be done far more effectively, and policies by government had to be implemented to do so. Imagine how many more people would have died had the Treatment Action Campaign not done what they did. Again, Section 27, NGO, forcing government to deliver books to schools in Limpopo. I mean, how crazy is that? That an NGO has to tell government to do its work and get the courts to compel them to do so. Again, in the Life Esidimeni tragedy, where 140 people died, Section 27 and other NGOs had to eventually go to court to get the Gauteng government to amend their policies and to do their work properly, so that we do not leave the most vulnerable at the beck and call of the landmark case to get government to apply the process properly. Now, the notion that are we governing through the courts comes very clearly in this case, because we had to use the courts, or civil society had to use the courts to protect themselves from the abuse of power, the abuse of not carrying out the constitutional processes that have to take place in order to introduce a nuclear energy deal. If the courts were being used, the executive back, and said, do the work properly. And if you do the work properly, you may get nuclear energy. And so why didn't they go back? The court process is right, or the constitutional process is right. I think they would have found that there would have been one certainly couldn't afford. So in many cases, another one that's in place right now is the electoral reform. Very important that independent candidates can stand. And this is a constitutional issue that has been found wanting by our electoral. They have not understood this for decades now. And it took an NGO to have to go to the Constitutional Court to compel Parliament to do its work. It didn't say, the courts didn't say this is what the Electoral Act should say. That would be governing through the courts. All the court said is, use your powers within Parliament and fix the Electoral Act and amend it so that it is constitutionally binding. And they haven't done that for years. And the Constitutional Court ordered the legislature to do so within 2 years. They gave them 2 years to fix the act. And Parliament dragged their feet and missed the deadline and another deadline. And this is an impact that severely impacts on our constitutional rights and democracy in this country. So I think there's a lot of examples, and I think just to close, then the view is from civil society, and certainly where we are, govern the finances and the institutions that manage service delivery in this country are done properly. And if they're not, it is a sad reality that civil society has to keep reverting back to the courts and relying on the courts to protect this abuse of power. And it happens so often. And sadly, the poorest of the poor suffer the most because they just cannot afford the legislation costs. They cannot turn to the courts to protect them. And so it is reliant on civil society and many organizations that are doing good work out there to have to turn to the courts and ask them for the protection that they need. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Greetings to the chairperson of the BBC, the CEO, and the entire leadership, fellow panelists, the moderator, and ladies and gentlemen. I hope I still have a voice. I come from a very long briefing. As we all know, it's a process of decision-making and how that decision-making should be done. And decision-making, there are several pillars, and part of those pillars is it's public participation. We say that government governs on behalf of the people, for the people, and therefore there should be public participation, there should be responsiveness, there should be accountability. It must be done in a manner that is responsible, but also it must be done in a manner that is transparent. It must be consensus-orientated. It must be effective, efficient, and equitable. And that's where the issue of social justice and redress comes in. The Constitution is very clear in the manner in which it is outlined that this should be done. Fails, what then comes in? It is the pillar on the consistency with the rule of law. Now, what is the supreme law of our country? It is the Constitution. So in each and every decision that is being, it is the, but as outlined by my fellow panelists, what we intend and would tend to see in the process of governance, challenges then become. And then what happens? There's no public participation. Business is quiet. I'm gonna make an example. When state capture broke, a lot of the issues involved around the procurement and procurement irregularities and non-following of processes in our country, and that at large involves. And again, as correctly said by my fellow panelists, it is us as members of the public who then approach the courts. The thing with the courts is that they don't just enter the fray out of their own. There must be an application that's brought before the court, and the court then adjudicates on that application. But when you look at the balances that need to be made within the prescripts of the law, prescripts of the supreme law of legislature that must hold the executive accountable. Now, we have seen how many times does the executive walk scot-free, unaccountable to the legislature. In fact, what we witness is that politically the executive is senior than the legislature in our country. Now, if there's that imbalance in power from a political level, then how are they going to have the power from a decision-making level to enforce accountability? In the executive, it is not enough. Do we have sufficient reforms of our governance system as a country? Still stay bare, even after a lot of alarms were being raised. But whose duty is it to hold the executive accountable to ensure that they implement reforms that are being proposed from the different sectors, even from constitutional institutions such as the one that I come from? It is the legislature. It is the legislature that actually approves the budget for the executive. That is how much power the legislature has over the executive. But we still find corruption escalating in our society. Corruption, by the way, did not end with state capture. It is still there, it is still escalating. I'm certain as sector, and that is perpetuated through the corridors of government. And what is that doing, particularly to the equitable nature which we want to find business in? We can pass the legislations, but if the actions and the implementations of how we govern is not in line with those legislations, then for me, really, it is a government that indeed requires that there must be intervention. Our government has put themselves in the situation where they are at, where the judiciary is then approached by the public to ensure that there is a proper governance system. In fact, the public goes to the judiciary for protection against its own government. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you that the state of governance has eroded because there is no longer a trust relationship between the government and its citizenry. And that is a very important relationship in governance because the government governs on behalf of its people. That is when then you find the judiciary having to come in and the courts having to come in at a state where they need to uphold the rule of law. Because it is the citizenry that would have approached the courts and say, no, 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 we are not governed in line with the principles of good governance. We are not governed in line with the Constitution because it is the Constitution that's the supreme law of the land. Even the legislation that's being passed, it needs to comply with the Constitution. Therefore, the highest standard that we are in as a country with this judicial activism, because there is no public activism as it should be. There is no ethical leadership at the level at which it should be. And by the way, the test for good governance shouldn't be a legal prescript. It shouldn't be an offense. It should actually where government governs according to best practice and ethically, not wait to be caught. You should do good even when you are not seen. But the bar has been at a legislative level. It must be an offense. The bar is very low. And that is why we find ourselves in the situation that we are in, that the judiciary then has to come in. And what the judiciary does, it upholds the Constitution. The issue that my fellow panelist has referred to of the nuclear, where the court found that the process was irregular. It is in fact that process that has put us where we are at today. If the process had been followed properly, and the particular prescripts had been applied in the manner that it should have been, whichever procurement that was supposed to take place to ensure that it averts the situation in which we are in, where we are in an energy crisis, those would have been avoided. Therefore, it is critical that the rule of law is upheld at a governance point of view, at a governance level, in line with the Constitution, even with the passing of the laws, and that we do not wait to a situation where we see ourselves in, where we find ourselves in judicial activism. And by the way, if our judiciary was not active and it was not responsive in the manner in which it is at, I think we would have found ourselves in a much deeper crisis than we are in. Thank you.
No, thank you to my panelists, and sorry to, we are just constrained for time, we are running late. I think we'll give the floor to ask a few questions, but maybe the first one will come from me. Do you believe that the law is interpreted through consequences or its intentions? If the intention is social justice, why do the outcomes sometimes don't reflect that? And maybe this is in the context of transformation. Maybe I think that is also for both of you, Public Protector. And the other question is, do you believe that the ideological commitments of judges sometimes impact the outcomes that we see?
Thank you. The law should be interpreted through the decision you take. You should foresee what end result it is going to have. And therefore, the intention must be in line with the Constitution, as I've said. And I don't know whether I should say fortunately or unfortunately, but we are a constitutional democracy. And there's a reason why we are a constitutional democracy. It's like a Bible to a Christian. A Christian who doesn't follow the Bible and then say that they are a Christian and they subscribe to a Bible. If we think we have missed it, then it means that we have missed it at the level of our Constitution. And if there's any intention that needs to be rectified, it is at the level of the Constitution. But at the stage at which we are at currently, every intention should be in line with the Constitution so that we ensure that the consequence thereof is in line with the law and it upholds the rule of law. Ideological commitments of judges, I really don't want to comment on it on you find that this judgment really, it's quite an error and probably it could have been approached differently. And again, I think the system knew that judges too are human beings and they are fallible to make mistakes. And that is why if you look at the book of Tom Bingham, he says that the rule of law really depends in the hands which carries it. And the hands which carries it must firstly be hands that hold the rule of law.
Yeah, thanks. To take care of either judges who are swayed and give judgments that are dubious, and that's why you have full benches or not. That's why you have an appeal process. And if you follow the appeal process where they get it wrong, generally speaking, right up to the Constitutional Court where a full bench is, the errors that do happen at the lower courts are corrected along the way. So there's sufficient checks and balances. And as the advocate says, there are going to be issues. It's not infallible. There are going to be problems. But to give judgments that do not dictate to the executives what to do, but to send them back to the drawing board, to stick within the prescripts of the Constitution, as the advocate says, if this wasn't the case, we'd be in a very dire situation. The courts, unfortunately, the corollary of is extremely high, and it shouldn't be that way. Our courts should be able to be dealing with other matters that can, or lack of service delivery, or lack of applying the Constitution.
No, thank you for those responses. Can I take 3 questions, please? Yeah, I'm being overruled based on time. Can I take 1 question?
Masiari, I've got just a question. I would like to just ask, in terms of the social justice organizations, do you not feel like in the space where you are, you tend to sometimes ignore the developmental part of litigation? I'll give an example. Issues like car powership, the issues that you've mentioned that social justice organizations have dealt with, most of them seem to protect certain interests in the economy, whereas when we look at other issues, for example, Steinhoff, 200 billion wiped out. No private prosecution has been put out. No one has tried to enforce anything. When you look at the mining sector, Zamazamas and so forth, we do not see social justice organizations going to court on issues that could help develop different sectors that are not protecting certain interests. My last question to the public protector, maybe you can assist me with this one. With regards to Steinhoff, 20 billion worth of funds from workers through the PIC's investment wiped out. Is this something that does not fall within your space? Because as the Constitutional Court ruled, your findings are no longer just recommendations. If the German officials could find that there's an issue, workers, teachers, nurses, everyday people, and be able to make a recommendation or a finding where possible, which could at least let us, Black South Africans, see justice being done to people who are not just black and low-hanging fruits. Thank you.
Thanks. I think the first question was directed to Autumn.
Yeah, so there are thousands of NGOs and civil action organizations that are trying to do as much as they can to, within their mandates, On the issue of Steinhoff, you're absolutely right. A lot more should be done. Our view is that that is government's work. That is not a problem for government to go and do what they have to do. Government doesn't mean to say that we condone what happened at Steinhoff. It's absolutely diabolical. And people should have been in jail by now, 100%. Right, there are bigger social issues, but our social justice issues that we are tackling in government is to make sure that water planning is done far in advance so that communities aren't suffering the way we are with regards to no future planning. We have been giving input that, so we're dealing with a lot of issues of policy within the processes of the acts that govern commerce. All of those need to be enacted on. And to try and assume that one or two or three organizations are going to do all that work. What we're asking government, and sometimes we have to compel government. We've had to take Mandama's cases out against the Hawks to do their work on a couple of cases. And it's sad that we have to do that because the Hawks should be, and the prosecutors that should be investigating Steinhoff should have done this so long ago, and we should have been seeing action today, but we're not. So what are we doing? Are we expecting civil society, NGOs who are not funded by government, who are not funded by business, who are funded by the ordinary citizens to use their little money that they have to go and fight all the big cases when government, the executives should be doing that work. So we'll do as much as we can, but don't castigate us because we don't get to all the cases that everybody else wants us to take on. It's, we are turning away billion rand abuses of your taxpayers' money. Billion rands every day that we just cannot get to. It is crazy.
Thank you. I think I need to say this. I mean, South Africa is a class society, right? South Africa is a society where we still live according to rural areas, semi-urban, urban areas. Is a society where largely we are punched with poverty. And the majority of people who are poor and rural is black South Africans. We are a society of different ideologies, and these ideologies are influenced by different factors. Gender, race is some of them. Now, as you point at some of civil society, where is the black civil society? Granted, the ideology, but where are you with your ideology to fight what is rightful in terms of social justice and what you perceive? In fact, as a people, we have borrowed our power and probably totally given it over to government. There are avenues that those civil society organizations which feels that their ideologies, or even society, communities, that feel that some of the civil society organizations that take matters up don't represent them, to stand up and represent themselves. It is part of government, the right to do so. And correctly, my brother, there are institutions such as ours which do not require you to pay to be able to ensure that you enforce governance. And yes, in a matter where there is public funds, it involves public funds, it involves public officials, it involves public institutions, we do have jurisdiction as to assist us to take up some of these matters. Thank you.
No, thank you. On the basis of time, we won't take the last closing remarks. I think the takeaway message is that
Advocates Koleka and Mr. Wayne, well, an issue that is quite emotive, important, and topical. So thank you so much, and you've left us with a very, very important question as the Black Business Council. Blade, yo, yazi ngithanda kanje. Bonginkosi Emmanuel Blade Nzimande, Minister of Higher Education. He could not be with us earlier on due to his many commitments, but we appreciate that now he's here. So over to you, Minister. You can come on stage to address us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Opportunity to greet and all the leadership collective of the Black Business Council, the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Hanki Matabane, and the entire membership of the BBC, which is here. Let me also give a special greetings. You may accuse me here of being biased, to Mr. Spear, the chairperson of the, which means I'm also one of the sponsors. Let me also greet all the esteemed guests that are here. Now, the danger is that I may not be able to greet all of them. They'll excuse me. I saw in the public protector is here, was just speaking now. Special greetings. The former VC of University of Cape Town, Professor Pakeng, and all other esteemed guests who are here, ladies and gentlemen and members of the media. Thanks for your understanding that I couldn't join you earlier today, that at least you were able to be flexible, because myself I wanted to come and say, give this message. I never miss major BBC events, Mongameli, as you know. I'm delighted that I'm here and your discussion under the theme, a very important theme, by the way, 20 years of the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act, accelerating implementation, creating jobs, and growing the economy. And congratulations for convening this, because it's very important that it's yourselves who are able to come together and make a proper reflection on this, on whether we are making progress or not as society. And I'm very pleased that you invited me to come and talk about skills development and their role in economic transformation, including some reflections on the fourth industrial revolution, skills for the future sector, including the BBC, in a partnership for skills development and innovation. Without this partnership, actually, we'll not have a skills revolution in the country. It's very important, and you will understand why also as I go further. Except that I've got, from my experience, and I don't want to be unfair on the sectors of the private sector that have worked with us, really done well. But I've got an uneasy sense that South African business, historically, has been too much used to cheap labor. And they don't understand forging partnerships to produce skills. And that in itself is also in their own interest. Given the nature of our economy, where it comes from, an economy largely owned by white South Africans, and that and we come from. Continues to be interested in this matter and also plays an active role in partnering with government in skills development. The central mandate was skills development in our country. We are guided by our NDP, a National Development Plan, our white paper on post-school education and training, our National Skills Development Plan, economic reconstruction and development skills strategy, and our critical skills list. These instruments are a signpost towards our enrollments for our institutions. We don't thumbsuck our enrollments in our universities and TVET colleges. They are based on these plans. And those enrollment plans are aimed largely to respond to the skills required for our socio-economic development. Our department is also involved in the development of critical skills, which includes, for instance, nowadays, skills. We have a hydrogen society roadmap for South Africa. Also skills for modernizing agriculture, the health and energy sector generally, and skills for both the public and the private sector. I'm very pleased to tell you that we are in the process now of developing what we call the Master Skills Plan for our country. So that we have got what is happening to provide those skills, what needs to be accelerated, and so on. And at an appropriate time, Mongameli, our plan. As part of implementing the skills mandate in the country, my Department of Higher Education and Training oversee an institutional landscape comprising of 26 public universities. We have 50 TVET colleges, 9 community education and training colleges, and 21 sector education and training authorities, and other private providers. That's the landscape. We're doing this work also in collaboration with my other department of Science and Innovation, which is responsible for the National System of Innovation. I would like, using this platform, to once more invite BBC. Let's partner on science, technology, and innovation. There is no future for you as business people, I can tell you, without fear of contradiction, if we are not in the science, technology, and the innovation space. If apartheid left you behind, let's not allow now to be left behind by not being part of the science, technology, and innovation skills. And I'm willing to work with you through my Department of Science and Innovation. Our key outcomes in this drive of skills development, including, amongst other things, expanding access to post-school education and training opportunities, and improve the quality of provision and responsiveness of our post-school system. Our immediate task is that and I think we are possibly the only country in the world where we have got almost 3 times university students to college students. That's anomalous, because we have a system that believes that in order to be someone, you must do matric, an academic matric, and then go to university. If you don't go that route, you are a nobody. That's completely wrong. Germany. Many of you drive the nice German cars here. Only 30% of school leavers go to university. 70% get apprenticed. That's why we've got this thing that only 6 students, by the way, who start grade 1 go to university. And only 2 finish the university in record time. The 4, they don't finish it in record time. Now, if 6 out of 100 who start grade 1 go to university, where is the... So even politically, as a country, for purposes of stability, we must just massify the college sector. I'm not saying universities are not important. They are very important, but there is no country where you want to have 80% of your students going to university. That's just not possible. Now, we have to massify. Our National Development Plan says we want 2.5 million students in TVET colleges by 2030, 1.6 million in universities. At the moment, I'm standing at just over 500,000 TVET colleges. I have 7 years to multiply 5 times. Certainly, we won't reach that target. But nevertheless, in the 7 years, there is a lot that we can do and that we should do in partnerships with yourselves in particular. Of course, we have to diversify our university system as well and overcome the inequalities within our university system as well. And our universities must not want to imitate each other, Professor Pakeng. I don't want the University of Zululand to say I want to be like UCT. That's wrong. Develop your own speciality as University of Zululand and be excellent in it, in South Africa and globally. That is why I've got a Sibusiso Pengu development program to support your historically disadvantaged universities to become what they should become. I'm also pleased to say, just to count some of the things that we have done, we have established 34 centers of specialization at 20 TVET colleges with an investment of 68 million rand. What are we doing about these centers of specialization? We are saying, if a college here in Iguruleni is good in plumbing, let's strengthen it and let's bring it closer to employers so that the students and lecturers are able to get work placement. That is, to us, very important. By the way, when my department was established in 2009, there was only one trade test center for artisans in South Africa, here in Olifantsfontein, Endlel. Now there are 33 that we have created in various TVET colleges. Because that one was made for the fact that it was only young, white, often males, who were actually allowed to be artisans. And by the way, by producing artisans, we are growing the economy. This area we are in Nguruleni is the industrial heartland of South Africa. The reason most of these SMEs that are here are actually artisans that were trained by the apartheid regime, white artisans. We need to produce black artisans in big numbers, including another injustice that we are addressing, that we have a lot of black workers in your workplaces who are doing artisan work, but they're not recognized for that. So we are doing recognition of prior learning to actually upgrade them. Sifuna nokuthatha labo bush market them, take them to TVET college, so that the number of cars that go in are equal to the number of cars that also go out. We are also have introduced a wonderful program, and I would like BBC to come close to this, the Entrepreneurship Development Program, together with our establishing innovation hubs in our TVET colleges, because our philosophy as this government is that innovation is everywhere, at the highest level of it, as well as at grassroots level, you will find innovation. Through our SETAs, we have injected 138,600,000 rands for the workplace training over the last year, paid directly to employers to produce, amongst others, artisans and other needed occupations. Our biggest need, I want to say this to BBC, we want workplaces. Place experience in operation is something that is very important. Employed Youth Fund towards the bursary programs, benefiting students enrolled in undergraduate and postgraduate programs. We're doing all this because we are not going to change, still pointing out in 2023. That actually shows the route we still have to travel. And skills development is part of addressing that. I was pleased, by the way, about this earlier debate. It's a pity I joined it towards the end, you know, about is being used by moneyed interest to go to the public protector to defend the poor. People are wanting to change things such. Private colleges on the fourth industrial revolution are doing a lot of curriculum transformation. We are introducing modern skills in robotics and in all other related fourth industrial revolutions discipline. And also, by the way, we are now strengthening our community colleges. That's another area that BBC must be interested in. Because this assumption that if a 40-year-old lady from Soweto left school in Standard 4, what she still wants today is they want to be able to acquire a skill to bake in order to go and sell cakes in the surrounding schools and put food on the table. We are changing now. Our community colleges are no longer about R, A, E, O, U. They are now also about short skills programs. That if a young man in the rural areas wants to learn the art of fencing in order to protect livestock from the highway that runs through the rural areas, let's train them to do that. That is the skills that we are actually talking about. Now, through my Department of Science and Innovation and our Technology Innovation Agency, as I've said, we are setting up innovation hubs, and we've completed 4 innovation hubs deep in the rural that black people can't do mathematics, Professor Pakeng, which is actually not true. But we have to break that. That is also because we are not going to be able to provide skills unless we break that Verwoerdian thing. Even myself as a student at the University of Zululand, our lecturer said, you're 150 first year economics. Black people don't understand economics. You are shouting black power. You must know your black power is only good behind the spade. That's where we come from. We are told today we are not supposed to have affirmative action, empowerment, and so on, because that's racialization. But yesterday, when I was doing my first year at university, I was told the issue of empowerment through skills and other things is a precondition for building non-racialism in South Africa. Those who are to continue. That is why I am very committed to work with yourselves to be able to take all these programs forward. I have also, amongst other things, by the way, said to all TVET college principals, sign an agreement. If you don't have a relationship with industry, we are not a TVET college principal. You do not deserve to be there. Even in rural areas, make a partnership with the police smart these days. So it is very important that we do that. So from our experience, such partnerships benefit all participants. I therefore call on the BBC and partners to join us in our drive towards a skilled and capable workforce, because that is at the heart of changing the racialized and gendered nature of the South African economy. Let's walk together this path so that we will be able to get the kind of South Africa that we want. I-South Africa kuyo wonke umuntu, okungaqhubeki kwabamhlophe abadla izambane likapondo. Thank you very much.
Can I call on stage the panel? Yes, skills development, please. We're waiting for the minister to take a picture with you. Thank you so much, Minister, for that stimulating speech and your willingness to partner with us. You've, in the past, I think not more than once, we've come to the NBC Black Business Council. We'd like to thank, and we hopefully put to our moderators and speakers, those were with us yesterday and those were with us today. We're immensely grateful for also being here with us. Politicians were here with us who made the time, captains of industry. And I want to say that, you know, I think we had a women powerhouse. Did you think so? A women powerhouse from yesterday. So thank you so much. Without your participation, our topic will be meaningless. We also like to thank our sponsors, our anchor sponsors, WRCTA and Rainwater, and the others as displayed on this banner behind me. Thank you so much for your generosity and also for your continued support. We will not be here having the summit today if it was not through your contributions, for hosting us Let's keep on supporting black business. We are pressed for time. The presidency is on our case. We should have finished by 3:15. So if you are traveling, travel safely until we meet again. 2024 summit, and God bless. I'll request that we so much.
Bomel bontate aritsweng bomel bontate aritsweng bomel bontate aritsweng re tla bua ka ntle re tla nka di picture ka ntle le minister. Let's go. Tshisi.